She had only asked for a table for one. It was a quiet weekday evening, the restaurant half full with polished couples and business diners. She stepped in wearing a soft, cream cardigan over a pale blue dress. Nothing extravagant but clean, elegant, and unmistakably modest. Her hair was tied back simply, her eyes scanning the room with a peaceful sort of expectation. She smiled at the host, who didn't smile back. "Reservation?" the host asked, curtly, looking her over quickly before glancing at the screen in front of him. "No," she said gently. "I was hoping to get a table, just for me." He frowned. "We're fully committed for the evening." She blinked once, calmly. "There are open tables." He followed her gaze, then laughed quietly, but not kindly. "Those are for VIP guests. This place, we tend to expect a certain kind of clientele." His tone wasn't aggressive, just sharp enough to sting. Behind her, a couple walked in, dressed in business casual, nothing flashy. No reservation either. But they were greeted with smiles and led to a table within seconds. She watched, saying nothing, just pressed her lips together and nodded slightly. "I don't want trouble," she said, "just dinner." The host gestured toward the door with a polite, forced smile. "You might want to try something more comfortable for your range." And just like that, she was ushered out. Not yelled at, not manhandled, just erased with words too polished to protest, too practiced to push back against. Outside, the wind picked up slightly as she stood near the valet, her eyes watching the night sky above the buildings. She took out her phone and sent one short message. It happened again, and then she waited, not in anger, not in embarrassment, because this wasn't the first time, but it would be the last. The restaurant buzzed with the hum of clinking glasses and low conversations. Inside, no one gave a second thought to the woman who had just been turned away. The host returned to his podium, pleased with how smoothly he had handled the situation. Another distraction avoided, another table saved for someone worthy. The staff moved on, unaware of the storm quietly gathering just beyond the doors.
Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, a sleek black car pulled up in front of a discreet high-rise. Inside the penthouse suite, Nicholas checked his phone. Her message lit up his screen. He stared at it for a moment, his jaw tightening. No punctuation. No dramatics, just, "It happened again." That was all it took. He stood, buttoned his coat, and gave one quick nod to his assistant. "Call Mason. I want the documents ready in 2 hours. Also, have the legal team start the standard acquisition sweep. We're going for full ownership." His assistant blinked. "The usual route?"
"No." He grabbed his phone and stepped into the elevator. "We're not just buying the building this time. We're taking the brand." Back at the restaurant, the evening wore on. The host had just seated a group of finance executives when a small commotion broke out near the entrance. A woman with a clipboard rushed past the podium, followed by 2 sharply dressed men in suits. Their badges caught the dim light. "Excuse me," one said to the host. "We need to speak to your manager." The host hesitated, then scurried off. A few minutes later, the manager arrived, his expression confused but curious. "Can I help you?" The taller man spoke. "This establishment is in the process of changing ownership. Effective immediately, operations will undergo legal review. Please gather your staff." The manager frowned. "What? Who are you?" The answer came not from the suits, but from the woman who walked through the doors just then. Her, the same woman they had turned away not even an hour earlier. This time, she didn't walk in timidly. She walked in like she owned the place, because now, she did. The silence that followed her entrance felt heavier than any shouted confrontation. The manager blinked at her, suddenly piecing together the situation, but still unable to believe it. The host, who had turned her away earlier, stood frozen behind the podium, his eyes darting from her to the suited men like he was waiting for someone to say it was all a prank. But it wasn't. She didn't need to raise her voice or announce herself. Her presence did it for her. She walked past the hostess stand, the same one that had denied her moments before, and paused only once, to glance at the open tables she had been told were reserved for a certain kind of clientele. The suited man nearest to her turned to the manager. "This is Nora Kensington, acting partner and spouse to the new sole proprietor of the Estavo Restaurant Group, effective as of 38 minutes ago." The manager stuttered, "To the entire group?" "All 7 flagship locations," the man confirmed. "You'll be briefed on the transition by tomorrow. In the meantime, all operations continue, under new guidance. Nora didn't gloat. She simply nodded and walked to a table near the center of the dining room. It was one of the spots with the best lighting, a small flower vase in the middle, and linen that had just been freshly pressed.
She pulled out the chair, sat down, and placed her phone on the table. "I'll be dining alone," she said softly, just like I had intended. Around her, murmurs spread like brush fire. Diners tried not to stare, but it was impossible. They had all seen her being turned away earlier. Now she sat calmly, surrounded by the men in suits, as the very staff who had dismissed her scrambled to adjust. The host approached her with a fresh menu, his hand trembling slightly. "Ma'am, I didn't know."
"You didn't ask," she said gently, not unkindly. "You looked and you decided." He stood there, red-faced, before she gestured to the table. "Thank you, I'd like the sea bass, and lemon water, that's all." He nodded and retreated quickly. The staff worked in hushed tones now, unsure whether to apologize or disappear. The kitchen moved faster than it ever had, the chef barking out instructions as if they were serving royalty. But Nora didn't act like royalty. She didn't order anyone around. She didn't flaunt anything. She just waited for her meal, at the same table where she had been told she didn't belong. And every person in that room, from the servers to the guests to the former manager, now knew she had always belonged. They had just failed to see it. As her food arrived, the room continued to buzz with low whispers and stolen glances. Even the most self-absorbed diners now glanced her way with wide eyes, the realization sinking in that the woman they had casually ignored was now seated at the center of power. The waiters, who had once brushed past her without a second glance, now approached with a mix of nerves and awe. The sea bass was presented on fine porcelain, garnished with citrus and herbs. The server leaned in, about to describe the dish in the overly rehearsed tone used for foodies and critics, but Nora simply gave a soft smile. "I know what it is," she said. "I designed this dish 8 years ago, back when the founding chef was still consulting in Paris." The server froze. She didn't say it with pride. She said it with memory. In truth, Nora had helped develop recipes and menus for luxury restaurants around the world, but always in the background. Her husband, Nicholas, had insisted she take credit, but she had preferred anonymity. She wasn't interested in applause. She was interested in authenticity. But tonight, that past was no longer a quiet footnote. It was stepping into the light. The manager approached cautiously with a complimentary bottle of wine. "On behalf of the staff, please accept our—" "I don't drink," she interrupted politely, without looking up. He cleared his throat awkwardly and set the bottle down anyway. "Of course, we simply wanted to extend our—" "I understand," she said, finally meeting his eyes. "You're doing what you think you should now that you know who I am. But the real apology isn't a bottle. It's how you treat the next woman who walks in alone, dressed plainly, asking for a table without reservation." He didn't respond. He couldn't. Her words landed with more weight than any ownership document could. By now, her husband had arrived. He walked in quietly. No flash, no drama, just the quiet power of a man who didn't need to prove anything. The staff practically lined up at the door, but he ignored them all. His eyes found Nora instantly. He kissed her on the forehead and sat beside her, glancing at the sea bass, then the room, then her calm face. "Better?" he asked. "Getting there," she replied, taking a bite. He chuckled softly, then leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the dining hall. Behind them, the former owner of the restaurant, the one who had sold under pressure, stepped through the side door. He didn't speak. He just watched the woman sitting at the center table, dining quietly, her grace completely unmoved by the spectacle surrounding her, and he knew then, this wasn't a power play. This was a homecoming. By the time dessert service began, the restaurant no longer felt like the same place. The buzz had shifted from whispers of gossip to a quiet reverence. Patrons who had once dismissed the woman at the table for one were now watching her with curiosity, even admiration. No one dared interrupt her, but the air around her table felt like the center of gravity. Nora wasn't basking in attention. She was focused on her food, on the calmness she had reclaimed. She laughed quietly at something her husband said, her eyes soft but alert. This wasn't revenge. It was a lesson, one she wasn't teaching through anger, but through presence. Nicholas watched her with the kind of respect that didn't need to be spoken aloud. He had always known who she was, what she was capable of, but tonight he had the satisfaction of watching the rest of the world catch up. Midway through dessert, an almond tart with honeyed pear, one of her original creations from years ago, the executive chef appeared at her table. He looked nervous, holding his chef's apron in one hand, head slightly bowed. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "If I had," she put her fork down gently, "you would have treated me differently." He nodded. "That's the problem," she added, not with malice, but truth. He swallowed hard. "Would you consider returning? To the kitchen, I mean. As creative director. Your dishes, your philosophy, this place needs you." She considered him for a long moment. Then she looked around the dining room. Not at the architecture or the lighting or the high-end silverware, but at the people, the staff, the ones watching her with caution and hope. "You already have what you need," she said. "You just need to start seeing people before they become headlines." She smiled and picked up her fork again. "That's how you build something lasting." The chef nodded slowly, thanked her, and stepped away, clearly moved. Nicholas raised his glass of water in a quiet toast. "To erasing the list," he said with a grin. She clinked her glass against his.
"To rewriting it," she replied. At a corner table, a young woman dining alone caught Nora's eye and gave her a small nod, one that spoke volumes. Nora returned it, and in that silent exchange, something changed. Not just for Nora, but for every woman who'd ever been turned away, judged, or dismissed.
Because power didn't always walk in shouting.
Sometimes it entered through the front door, alone, calm, and refused to leave quietly.
Weeks later, the staff talked. The guests who had witnessed the transformation whispered it to others. A short video clip leaked from a waiter's phone, just a few seconds of Nora sitting gracefully at the table, then Nicholas entering and shaking hands with the manager. That alone sparked a wildfire online. The headlines followed quickly. "Woman denied a table returns as owner. The power of quiet dignity in the face of elitism. How one woman changed an industry with a single meal." But Nora didn't chase the spotlight. She didn't sign book deals or appear on talk shows. She let the story live on its own. And quietly, behind the scenes, she went to work. The restaurant wasn't just under new ownership. It was evolving. Dress codes were softened, reservation rules rewritten. Staff training included modules on bias and unconscious judgment. A table for one became a symbol inside the company, a reminder that every guest mattered, regardless of appearances. Nora visited the other 6 restaurants in the franchise, always unannounced. She sat in corners, observed, talked to dishwashers and waitresses, asked what needed fixing. And when they found out who she was, she'd always say the same thing. "Just someone who wants to make the table bigger." Nicholas continued to support her, not as a show of power, but as a partner. He knew this had never been about ownership on paper. It had always been about ownership of dignity. One afternoon, months after that first night, a young hostess at the original restaurant spotted a woman waiting quietly at the entrance. She was older, modestly dressed, a little unsure. The hostess smiled warmly and walked over. "Good evening, ma'am. Would you like a table for one?" The woman nodded, surprised. "Right this way," the hostess said, leading her inside with grace and not a trace of judgment. From a quiet corner, Nora watched. She smiled, not because the restaurant had changed, but because people had, and all it took was one woman, one refusal to shrink, and one meal that reminded the world that true power never demands the table. It becomes the reason the table exists.